there is, in fact, a program and operations levy, a maintenance and operations levy, different ways of saying the same thing, that is and will be on our ballot this February for sure. The board just set the resolution putting that renewal on the ballot. It will happen for sure in February. The question tonight, the question we've been processing with our roundtable last week and now our third meeting tonight, is should we add another ballot proposition to the February election in our district? Should we add a bond issue onto that ballot? We did this in 2006. We had a levy that was up for renewal, and we added Proposition 2, which was a bond issue, to do all of this work that's displayed in these pictures to the right, and we'll talk about that work tonight. The goal is, after we present information and answer questions, is to have you help to inform us as to whether you think we're going the right direction. We want to be able to, as staff, listen and collect the input that we receive. We'll go to the school board on October 8th in this room, October 8th, and we will present to the board our recommendation based on everything that we've heard since we've tested this question. And then the board will have an opportunity to have a study session. I think it's October 22nd is the tentative date for that. Or
October 15th.
October 15th for the study session. And then they'll go in deep and work through more details and more information about this proposal. And if they felt favorable to move forward and put it on the ballot, then they'd start processing that at the end of October into the first part of November at the latest. So with that, if you would again grab this big piece, big sheet, and we'll just walk through and we'll talk about it. You have to jump around a little bit, and I'll point that out when we get there. So let's start with the last bond issue approved by voters in this district. In February 2006, voters in our school district approved a bond issue to do the work listed on page 2. What's cool about this is every project was done on time and within budget. Thanks mostly to this gentleman, very humbly sitting in the back, Ed Peters, and his counterpart, Nick Chow, over by the door. We completed these projects on time and within budget. In fact, well enough within budget to take the additional resources and reinvest it to do even more work than what the voters approved. So everything was done and more based on that bond issue. But one of the central pieces,
What was the amount of
$140 million was bonded. Good question. One of the central pieces of that bond issue is that by moving Linwood High School to the new site where it's located now, we could then use and harness the value and the power of the old Linwood High School. And that's where we want to talk a little bit about what happened and what's happening with that plant. I would venture to guess if you own property in our school district, or frankly if you own property anywhere in our country, it's worth less today than it was back in 2008. If you turn the page to page 3, this is from our county, and it shows the value of all the property in our school district. This is not just district property. If you have a house, it's in this number. If you know of a business, it's in this number. If there's a vacant lot somewhere and it has a value, it's in this number. And back in 2008, the total of all the assessed valuation in the district was over $25 billion. In 2013, it had dropped over 30-some%. If you had a house back then, and it was appraised to be sold or for any activity, it's worth considerably less than it was back at the peak. Now what happened then is all of our property, even the old Linwood High School, got caught up in that same wave that happened across our nation. The Great Recession hit everybody. It hit us as well. So our properties still have value, but they're not valued the same in today's market as they were back then. They're for sale or they're for lease, but they won't generate the same dollars they were anticipated to generate when we started on this road. The other thing that happens is when the economy is sliding, you don't want to do a fire sale with public property. You want to make sure you're getting the highest value out of those. So some of these parcels have just been sitting, waiting for the economy to pick up, and now there's activity. Now there's people in the business sector that are interested in parcels that have been sitting there growing weeds for 4 or 5 years. So that's starting to change. It is starting to turn around. We also have some economic activity happening or about to happen on some of these parcels, and I want to walk you through that. So let's go to page 4. I mentioned the old Linwood High School project. This was the only 40-acre site across from a major mall in the nation that hadn't been used for commercial purposes. It was a very rare parcel. And we were fortunate to have a 40-acre site where the new Linwood High School is located to build a new high school in that location. Cool thing, the new Linwood High School is actually more centrally located for the students that attend at that school. So that worked out great. But we entered into a development agreement with a group called Cypress. They're out of Texas. They make a living, that's their business, is to take properties and develop them for commercial purposes. So we are the landowner. The district still owns that Linwood property. But Cypress is doing work to try to develop that property, which involves putting in a road. There's a lot of progress has been made on that. Plans are coming together. The City of Linwood's been a great partner with us. We're fortunate Lauren Simmons, one of the members of the City of Linwood Council, is here this evening. He can't talk about this project because it's under review by the city. Just wanted to point out that we're making progress with the city on a road that is necessary for this to be developed. Costco, you may have heard already, is signed up, and their plan is to come in and use about half of the property. And then the front half, which is the part closest to the mall, is still being developed by Cypress. And they've developed and they're working on their plans to have that happen. When all is said and done, and this could be a few years, not months, when all is said and done, that will be the proverbial goose that lays the golden egg. We will own it, and it will have generated and be generating revenue back to the school district in the form of lease payments that goes into the capital projects budget and goes out to do other work without one penny to the taxpayer. That was the original vision. It still is the vision. It's just taking longer to make it happen because the economy was so bad for so long. But if you look at page 4, the zoning has been changed on the old Linwood High School property to allow this. Project design for Costco has been submitted to the city for approval. There's actually a schedule to start the site work, which would be necessary to site Costco there as well as put in the road. That'll start in the spring of 14. Costco could open tentatively in the summer of 2015. Again, all the proceeds from our capital projects properties go back into the capital projects budget and go towards other projects. These are not dollars we would use in the general fund. There's a separation in our state law about the use of proceeds from the sale or lease of property. And that's why it's really important that people understand this is to reinvest in projects, capital projects. It's not to support the general fund. If you'll turn to page 5, there's a couple other projects that we have going. Our current bus barn sits on property now referred to as Alderwood South. You might remember this if you go up and down the I-5 corridor, you see the buses tucked in behind that Michael's, just kind of the southern portion of Alderwood Mall. Well, in order for us to harness the value of that bus barn property, we need to move the bus barn to another site that we have. It's the old Cedar Valley Elementary where Scriber was for a few years. What's the nearest street to that one, Ed? 52nd. Are you familiar with where I'm at? It's kind of tucked in between that and the freeway. So we have that property. A few years ago we added to it to make it a big enough site to handle, and it's centrally located. It works perfect for our maintenance and transportation facility. Yeah, great question. Most of you are familiar with the convention center in Linwood, and right across the street from the convention center is property that we own, and that area is referred to as the Linwood City Center. We actually have, as a result of the last board meeting, we got permission from the board to enter into a purchase and sale agreement with a developer who wants about half of that property. So we're in active conversations right now in the process of selling half of that site. There are 2 other developers interested in the other half. So this one is active. Probably before this year is over, this will be done, and we'll have sold either half or all of that property. The money from this, again, goes into the capital projects budget. I'm not trying to be impolite by reaffirming this, but the proceeds from the sale of these properties goes into the capital project budget for capital project work. And it's really important for people to understand that we're not going to take dollars intended for capital projects and use it in the general fund. Page 6. There are 2 other properties that you'll recognize probably when I describe them. Melody Hill, which is an elevated piece, kind of on the corner of I-5 and 220th. We're going to take down the old buildings that are there. Probably with the garden tractor and a strong wind and a weekend, we could get those buildings down. It won't take much. They're not in great shape. But that property will be on the market very soon. And then the old Evergreen Elementary School across the street next to 236 is also available. There actually is interest in that property. But we don't want to sell properties for less than their value, so we're actually working with some commercial real estate experts, and they, on our behalf, are working with the city to get the road and access sorted out for these parcels, so that when we do sell or lease these properties, they're at their highest value. And so we want to do a little more work and due diligence to make sure we've really prepared these and have them teed up to maximize the return to the district. None of these sites are necessary to be future school sites, so we're not giving away the potential that we might need in the future to add space. We've got other sites that are not for sale and they're not for lease, and they're just being held for the future to be able to add students and schools if we needed to. Most of those are in the northern part of our district. All right, so let's go on to page 7. So the question now is, what's the next step? What are the next projects that we need to do that have been on hold in our school district that are in desperate need of being replaced or having major modernizations? So if you go to page 7, I want to walk you through this list. And part of what we need from you is feedback on whether this is the right list, whether the dollar amount is too high, if it's too low. The things that I share with you, think about 100 people who aren't here tonight and whether this is going to make sense to people if they hear this. First of all, you'll notice there's 3 schools: Alderwood Middle School, Lyndale Elementary, and Madrona K-8. You say, well, how is it, of all the schools in our inventory, we came up with these 3? Go back to an appendix that's included in your packet called Appendix A, which is a building and condition report. It should be on the back of one of the sheets that follows. And if I find mine here, I will hold it up for you. It looks like this. You've got that on the overhead as well, or getting to that? It's not on the overhead? All right. You should have it in your packet, though. What this is we have a group in our district called the Citizens Planning Committee, and the CPC has a subgroup that works on facilities, and they work with Ed and have for 14 years. And during that time, they do a very objective analysis of the condition of a building. This isn't whose kid goes to school there or who eats lunch with who on the weekends. This is about the condition of the facility, all right? And from that, there's a point value assigned to the building. Very objective process that determines which building is in the worst shape. Now, to show how this works, when I got here in 2004, Linwood High School and Meadowdale Middle School were at the top of that list. They're in the worst shape. Now, why would they be at the bottom of the list now? They're brand new. Okay? So this list is reworked as work is done in our district. What's showing now are Lyndale, Alderwood Middle School, and Madrona. Again, when I was here in 2004 when I came, and when we did the bond issue in February 2006, these schools were mentioned as being the top priorities to be addressed even with the revenue from the lease or the sale of property. But given what happened to the economy, we didn't have another $140 million plus to address those because the value isn't there. We'll get value, maybe at that level, maybe not at that level, and it won't be anytime soon given the slowness with which the economy is recovering. But nonetheless, the cost of fixing these schools is going up. And we've waited 6 or 7 years already. We can't wait longer. These needed to be replaced 6 or 7 years ago. So I'll tell a quick story about Lyndale Elementary, and there's probably lots of stories that can be told. But this gives you an idea of the condition of that school as well as the others that are listed. Last winter, the fan on the boiler at Lyndale Elementary went out. Well, this isn't rocket science. Just get another fan to keep that thing going. The boiler is so old, there was only one place that we could find a fan to replace that, and it was somewhere in the United States and not close. So we're days away of getting a fan to replace to keep the boiler going. This is in the middle of winter at Lyndale Elementary. We happen to have another ancient boiler in our district over at Westgate Elementary. We sent a maintenance person over to Westgate to take the fan off the boiler at Westgate, to drive over to Lyndale to put the fan on, to be able to turn the boiler on to keep the building warm, and a couple hours later they had to drive it back over to Westgate and put it back on the boiler at Westgate, turn it on to keep the heat on in that building. This is winter. We have kids in classrooms that need to be warm and staff, and if you let the thing cool off at night, you're going to have pipes breaking, and then you're going to have a big big problem. This is not made up for the sake of this presentation. This has actually happened this last winter. We were shuttling a fan back and forth between boilers to keep the two schools operating. And if that fan would have gone, we'd have probably been in there with hair dryers. We were out of options. But what we've done now is, if you notice the picture, we've replaced the boiler because of other capital projects dollars. We replaced the boiler at Westgate. We hesitate to put money into Lyndale because we'd like to replace the whole school, right? Westgate's farther down on the list, but Lyndale's waiting for resources to be replaced. We've taken all the parts off the old boiler that are still usable from Westgate, and they're in a box underneath the boiler at Lyndale, including the fan, right? Hopefully to get through another winter or two. So I just share that because I think it's illustrative of what this district has been doing, which is literally trying to nurse along old buildings and make them work as long as we possibly can. But this is a condition report, again, a very objective process, and huge compliments to Ed and staff for the work that they do. As buildings are modified or there's improvements made, it changes the point total, and buildings can move around on this list. So you might look at this in 2 or 3 years from now, and it might look a little different based on work that we do. And I'll talk more about that in a second, but I just wanted you to know that how the schools were identified for this list, for this next bond issue, was a result of a pretty objective, pretty thorough process, and again, not based on politics or geography or socioeconomics or anything else. It's really driven by what's the state of that building and where do we need to make the replacement. So let's jump back to the page that we were on, which shows the list of projects that we're trying to vet to see what people think as far as what's our next step. And I think, again, this is page 7 for your packet. So replacing Alderwood Middle School and replacing Lyndale and replacing Madrona. There's a point at which it's actually more cost effective to build a new school than to try to modernize an old school. So it's called new in lieu of, and you'll notice that Linwood was built anew and Meadowdale Middle School was built alongside the old Meadowdale Middle School. And it's much more efficient, it's more effective. The buildings that we're building have 60 plus year lifespan, maybe 100 years or longer, and they're very efficient. The schools that we're replacing typically have flat roofs or are poorly insulated. All the mechanical penetrations on the roof create water problems. You know, hundreds of outside doors that every time you open the door you change the energy efficiency of the room in the winter. The new buildings that we build are very energy efficient. Those three are pretty straightforward. So we're talking replacing Alderwood Middle, Lyndale, and Madrona at the same scale of what you're seeing in these pictures to the right. The fourth item, this is the cost of moving the bus barn. This is moving it from its current location to the new location to be able to then release the power and the value of the property underneath it. The fifth one is one I want to spend some time talking about. And again, apologize if I'm going to give you more information than you want, but I'm trying to put this in context so that, again, you can help other people understand the importance of this. I'm going to talk about a court case in the state of Washington, and then I'm going to bring it back to how it's relevant to this one on the list. Several years ago, our school district joined up with other districts and we sued the state. The lawsuit to the state was over the state not funding K-12 education in our state appropriately. You might have seen this in the newspaper referred to as the McCleary decision. McCleary is the last name of one of the families that were the plaintiffs, but hundreds of school districts now have joined the plaintiffs and are part of the lawsuit. In fact, there's over 400 members of the News Coalition, which is the group behind the plaintiffs that have sued the state. At the trial court level, the judge ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, declaring that the state of Washington was not meeting its constitutional mandate to amply fund K-12 education. The state of Washington appealed that decision. It took a couple years, but the state Supreme Court heard the case and affirmed the lower court ruling. The state Supreme Court ruled that the state of Washington was not meeting its constitutional mandate and, in fact, had to dramatically improve funding to K-12 education. In fact, the court did what is unprecedented in our state. The Supreme Court retained jurisdiction. Rather than just ruling and walking away, the court said, we're going to watch and monitor this to make sure the state complies. There have been a couple cycles of the legislative process since the Supreme Court ruled, and each December the court has issued another very strong, very direct missive to the legislature to comply with the court order. Why is this relevant, or how is this relevant? In the state's trial, it testified as to what it was going to do to amply fund K-12 education. Part of the state testimony included all-day kindergarten and lowering class sizes in grades 1, 2, and 3. The Supreme Court ruling was to the state, okay, you need to do what you said you're going to do, and you need to have it done by the year 2018. So there's more to that court order than just all-day kindergarten and class sizes grades 1, 2, and 3, but there is a Supreme Court order to the legislature to do those things by 2018, as well as other things that are required. How is it relevant to us right now? Well, we have schools that we could add all-day kindergarten, and we did in some schools this year. We have schools where we don't have space to do that. We have schools where we could lower class sizes in grades 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. We have many schools where we couldn't. The Mukilteo School District, and I'm not talking about anything that's not already in the media. The Mukilteo School District, just a stone's throw from here, turned down over $1.5 million of state funding for all-day kindergarten. Not because it isn't a good program move, because they don't have the classroom space to add it. The last thing we want to see happen is to have state dollars come to us to make all-day kindergarten a promise for everyone, and to have lower class sizes, grades 1, 2, and 3, and not have a room to put them in. So those are the issues and the challenges that are behind this item on the agenda. $40 million would give us about 60 additional elementary classrooms. We've calculated if it's fully funded, our need would be around 53 additional classrooms. So there's a little bit of space, but not much in that number. This would allow us to meet the promise of all-day kindergarten across all of our elementary schools and lowering class sizes significantly in grades 1, 2, and 3. The way that we would add classroom space at the elementary schools would vary from school to school, and this gets really complicated. We have some schools that have a high percentage of free and reduced lunch students. The state can flow these dollars to those schools faster if it wants to, and that's what it just did. We got money for all-day K, but it's schools that have the highest poverty level. So other schools that would love to have and will have all-day K maybe aren't going to be funded as fast as other schools. We have some schools like Seaview that has 2 or 3 open classrooms today. We have schools like Spruce that didn't even have enough classrooms for the start of this school year. And you saw, if you saw the article about tonight's meeting in the Herald, pictures of the library being cut up to create 2 new classrooms within the space of the library, which makes the library smaller, just to give us 2 more classrooms at Spruce. Spruce is full right now. Linwood Elementary is full right now. We know we've got to add classrooms at some of our schools next fall, no matter what happens with this bond issue. We don't want to be in a situation where we've got money from the state to add all-day K and money from the state to lower class sizes dramatically, grades 1, 2, and 3, and not be able to have a classroom to put kids in. It's really simple. This gives us the authority to have the bonds sold, to have the money to do that work ahead of the actual need for those classroom spaces. Then some people will say, well, just do a boundary change, just modify the boundaries. Our boundaries right now have been modified so much to try to create and use the capacity that we have. If we do another boundary change, we're going to have kids driving by an elementary school to get to the one that they're assigned to and spend an hour and a half on a bus to make that happen. So we're going to be efficient, and we'll look at boundaries like we do every year and try to adjust them, but we cannot do this we cannot boundary change our way out of this situation. We've got to be able to add classrooms where the families live, where the schools need more space, and it will look a little different from school to school. This would allow us to stay ahead of it, to make sure that we had a classroom to go with an all-day K program and to lower class sizes in grades 1 through 3. This last category on the list is kind of a miscellaneous category, but it's pretty important, because if you remember back to Appendix A and all the schools that are not included, there are significant issues, just like the boiler story. There are significant capital projects issues with the roof and with other infrastructures, fields, all kinds of issues that need to be addressed at those schools. This number is 40 million. So the 40 million allows us to upgrade and keep limping along with some of those older buildings. but it also would change potentially the ranking of those buildings on Appendix A. When the CPC would convene with Ed and staff, having made some improvements to those schools could actually change the position of some of the schools that are left on that list. If you were to say, what is our need in total for capital projects work in our district, it's probably over $700 million. It's a big number, big number. Now let's put that number in context. What we're looking at tonight on this list on page 7 totals about $245 million. Now the way a bond issue works, it's more similar to how your mortgage would be on property. If the voters approve the bond issue, the tax of $245 million, it doesn't start like the next day. It gives the district the authority to sell bonds. Just like a U.S. savings bond, it's a piece of paper and a promise that if you buy a bond, you will get your principal amount back plus interest. It's an investment. What the district gets is the money that you used when you bought the bond. But we're not required to sell all the bonds at one time. In fact, we don't. We sell those bonds in different issuances that could be sometimes years apart. And we only sell as many bonds as we need to do that next step of work. So we could take the $245 million and divide it over 3 different issue dates and only sell what we needed to do that first set of work. And then the only tax burden the public would experience is that amount to pay the principal and interest on those bonds that were issued at that time. We do that for several reasons. One is we don't want to spike people's tax rate. We try as best we can to have that debt come on as old bonds are paid off. And we really can't do $245 million worth of work all at once. You have to spread that out over a period of time. So in this situation, if you look at page 8, there's 3 points we want to make. One of them is that by managing the timing of the projects and then managing the sale of the bonds, as old bonds are paid off, we're able to keep the rate per thousand more constant. It's not free, and I don't want people to be misled. A bond issue does cost money. It's not free. If it didn't pass, taxes would go down, because it's not like a replacement levy. If you approve a bond issue, it means as a community you're deciding to invest in your schools. We're hoping that that's an investment people would want to make, and we can manage the work to keep that as steady as possible, but we don't want to be deceptive and have people think that it's the same as it is now. It might be different. So how much might I pay? If my house is valued at $300,000, if that's my property, if we approved a $245 million bond issue and we sold it in segments like we talked about, you're looking at approximately a total of $120, $125 per year that you would pay just for this bond issue. So it would be the taxes you had now, plus about $100 to $125 per year you'd pay to support this capital projects work. Like a house mortgage, it goes for 15 or 20 years, it goes for a period of time, and then it ends. And so it's possible, I'm sure, I probably won't be here, but 6 or 7 years from now, the district could be looking at another bond issue to do more schools on that list. And then there would be the same conversation as to whether the community wanted to afford it, what that cost would be. But bonds are for a while and then they're paid off, and most districts try to sell new bonds to fit in as the old bonds are paid off to keep that tax rate more stable for people. We actually have John Gore, who's a bond underwriter here, who's been working with our staff. John, raise your hand. If you have detailed questions about how that works, feel free to ask him. We appreciate you being here today, John. But he's actually working with Stuart, our Executive Director for Business and Operations, to really fine-tune exactly what the debt would be and what the timing of the sale would be, and with Ed, what projects would we need to do first and how can we spread that work out. The idea is to have that be as graceful as possible to get the work done as soon as possible, but without just causing a lot of people to be unsettled in terms of their tax rate. It's a lot more complicated than that sounds, but they do a really great job with that. So given that, if you turn the page to page 9, this is really the set for you to ask questions and then to fill out the input sheet. We as a community have a choice, and this is a community decision. Our public has to decide, is this work that's worth doing? Does it make sense? Is now the time to do it? Can I afford it? Do I want to afford it? What happens if I do nothing? Does the cost of these buildings go up or down in the future? Will it be less expensive to replace these schools if we wait? So these are the questions. Should we do nothing? Should we run a bond issue with the replacement program and operations levy on the February ballot? Should we run the bond issue later? Should we look at doing it later for some reason? Or is there some other scenario?